Hello and welcome to episode 127 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. Of course, I am your host, Rick Doherty, in honor of the 4th of July, which many Americans celebrated earlier this week. My wife, Courtney, will be on the show. The two of us will discuss 3 lands in Walt Disney World that are focused on and rooted in patriotism and the United States. Before we get started, there's a lot to cover on the YouTube channel and at the theme parks. First of all, last month I had Alicia Stella on the podcast to promote her fundraiser for the Trevor Project, which lasted throughout the duration of Pride Month in June. When she joined us on the show, she was approaching $20,000 raised, but she ended up exceeding $25,000, which is absolutely outstanding. It was so inspiring to see another example of what the theme park community can do when we work together towards something positive. In addition to a flat donation, I also ordered a print of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad in a lo-fi computer style. I can't wait for it to arrive and make its way onto my bookshelf. Speaking of Pride, Universal Orlando Resort made a big announcement late in June. The Thursday night Pride events at the Red Coconut Club in City Walk will continue for the month of July. These parties were getting rave reviews, pardon the pun, because the club created an environment that felt safe for absolutely everybody. I was only able to spend about 15 minutes at the last one in June, so I'm hoping to get the chance to really have a proper visit later this month. Getting back to charity, over the past few weeks, a bunch of people have reached out to me to ask if I'll be doing my basketball and soccer ball collection drive for Boys and Girls Club again next March. I was really surprised that so many people were still interested. Let me know in the comments if you would be willing to be a part of this again in 2024. Of course, as I mentioned many times, last week was also my birthday, so everyone should make sure to be subscribed to the Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty YouTube channel, where I'll be posting tons of videos from the festivities. That will also include a number of dining reviews from the restaurants that we tried. I promise it will be a fun time. We also passed a milestone on my birthday. The podcast had its 52nd straight episode to reach 1,000 views on YouTube. That is in addition to the success it has had on all the other platforms as well. To accomplish that feat for an entire year is just awesome. I can't believe how much we have achieved through this show. Now let's get things started by welcoming my wife, Courtney. Thanks for being here, Court.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Obviously, earlier this week, Americans celebrated the 4th of July, and I thought it would be a good time to look at the 3 lands most associated with the United States and patriotism. I think everybody would have to say that Walt Disney was very patriotic, so there is a lot of that Americana throughout the Walt Disney World parks. We're going to focus on Walt Disney World. And first, it's got to be Main Street, USA, in the Magic Kingdom, USA, right there in the title. So we're going to talk about that. Then we're going to move on to Liberty Square. And then finally, the American Adventure or the American Pavilion in World Showcase at Epcot. So starting with Main Street, USA, and this sense of Americana that they do build there with that small town Main Street. Now, Courtney is from a place that kind of has that sort of vibe, and she's originally from Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and there is that literal town square. Obviously, there's more Americana in Gettysburg than probably any other town or city in the country, but what are the vibes that you get when you first walk on Main Street, USA?
Well, yeah, it's definitely that small town feeling and turn of the century, older buildings, brick buildings, ambiance. You know, whenever they have the Dapper Dans, of course, especially that barbershop quartet, those older songs, the storefronts and windows really are reminiscent of that small town Americana, you know, the small shops, the mom and pop stuff. You have restaurants such as the Plaza that really help give it that feel, as well as Casey's Corner. Casey's Corner being baseball themed and again, very turn of the century, just feeling like very American hot dogs, fries.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously nothing more American, like when you talk about the good qualities of America, than things like hot dogs and baseball. Like, that's what you think of when you think of that, like, romanticism of the United States. And I definitely agree with that. We are going to talk about the restaurants in a minute. But when you talk about the Dapper Dans, I think that's a really good example of how they bring out that good sort of patriotism, that they do it as well with the Main Street vehicles. A lot of times you have to be at Magic Kingdom really, really early to see the Main Street vehicles. They don't run them all day. But it does give you that vibe of having like a horse-drawn carriage going down Main Street, or these turn of the century, like early 20th century vehicles that drive up and down Main Street. And it just puts you in a different era. And that's what Disney is always trying to do, whether it be Main Street USA or Tomorrowland or Frontierland or Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. They're trying to take you out of the current moment and put you somewhere else. And they really do a good job of that with those turn of the century vibes. The music playing, blowing bubbles, and obviously some Disney songs mixed in there, but then there's also like It's a Long Way to Tipperary. Like, they play those classic songs, mix them in with the Disney songs, and it really puts you in another time and place. I did want to mention too that we actually had the chance just last year. Every day on Main Street, they do the flag retrieval ceremony. Last year, we actually had the opportunity to be there on Patriots Day, and they'll usually pick somebody who's either active duty military or a veteran, and they will have them be a part of this ceremony. And it is really, really cool to do it on Patriots Day last year. We just happened to be there for Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party. And it was while we were meeting up with our friend Jillian that they just started this. And sometimes you just happen upon it, which I feel like those are the moments with everything at Disney. When you just happen upon it, that's when it tends to have the biggest impact, because you weren't planning on it. That was just a really inspirational thing to see. You mentioned a couple of the restaurants, so I think it's time that we should talk about the restaurants. There are 4 on Main Street USA that are actual restaurants. Casey's Corner, we already covered that. Can't get any better than that. The hot dogs, there is a plant-based hot dog that is pretty good as well. Baseball themed, everybody knows I love that. Then there's Tony's Town Square. This has had a bad reputation, but I feel like it's getting better. The last couple times I've been there, and some of those you've been there with me, I feel like the food quality is sort of improving.
Yeah, I believe they're changing up their menu, and it's definitely an improvement from what other people have said in the past versus these recent times that we've gone.
And we have been to the Plaza restaurant a number of times, especially since the reopening after the pandemic closures. We went very, very early when it was kind of hard to get a reservation because they only had like 3 tables inside because of social distancing. It's not a huge restaurant, but this is that American style food. We're talking meatloaf, we're talking mashed potatoes, we're just talking regular American food. You have a view of Cinderella Castle from inside the building. It is one of the places right now that you can get a beer if you like to drink alcohol. But this is a really good restaurant. I think the food here, for the price, when you consider it's Disney prices, it's not quite as expensive as some other restaurants. It's right there on Main Street. You get a little bit of air conditioning in the middle of a hot day. I like the Plaza.
I actually thought the plaza might be sort of a throwaway place, but when I've gone with you, Rick, I did like it as well. It was a little bit surprising. Nothing fancy, and again, it's kind of small, but you have your comfort food and you can see Cinderella Castle. And definitely, like you said, sit down, rest your feet, be in air conditioning, have a bite to eat. So don't discount the plaza.
And then the least American feeling restaurant on Main Street, USA is obviously Crystal Palace. But this is an all you care to enjoy restaurant. It is a character dining experience with the Winnie the Pooh characters. It's Winnie the Pooh, Piglet, Tigger, and Eeyore. And the food is pretty good. I prefer breakfast, I think. I like this meal at breakfast because it has some of the usual standard breakfast items. And I also like to sometimes get into the park before other people. You know, if you make that really, really early Crystal Palace reservation, you can get in before some other people. And that always has that exclusive feeling, which is fun, especially when you're on vacation. So I really like this restaurant, but I know it's not the most popular all you care to enjoy on property.
Right, it's not a I need to do this on my vacation, but it is a good option. And I know, Rick, you and I did it on a family vacation before we lived in Florida. We did it for breakfast. We absolutely loved it. Some people can say the food at lunch and dinner are hit and miss. And again, sometimes Disney changes up their menus here and there. So it's a good option, but not something you have to do.
And then obviously, when we're talking about Walt Disney's patriotism and how Walt Disney wanted this, I mean, Main Street USA is based on Marceline, Missouri, where he grew up when he was a child. And you have to mention the partner statue right in front of Cinderella Castle. Walt always wanted everybody to remember it all started with a mouse, and there he is holding hands with Mickey Mouse right there in the hub. As you look to every direction, you're seeing further into the park, and this is really where your Magic Kingdom day starts. You get up Main Street USA and you're just following the castle, following the castle. And then once you get to the partner statue, that's when you decide, are you going to Adventureland? Are you going to Frontierland? Back to Fantasyland or over to Tomorrowland? There's just something really cool about that partner statue there. But if you turn to the left, that's when you can head to the other land that we are going to be discussing today in Magic Kingdom, Liberty Square. And there is a lot happening in Liberty Square that I love to discuss. A lot of great theming here. I talk ad nauseum about how it's so cool that the shutters on all the windows are crooked because during the Revolutionary War, metal was such a valuable commodity that people didn't want to have metal holding the shutters in place, so they used leather instead. So just the next time you're there, look up at the windows and just notice that little bit of theming. I think a lot of people talk about the brown part of the floor that is to represent the waste that people would just throw out their windows and would make a river in the middle of the street. Disney did a fun little recreation of that in a way that definitely doesn't involve the smells. And the other thing is that Liberty Square technically does not have a bathroom because they wouldn't have bathrooms during colonial times, during the Revolution. So even the bathroom that is in the restaurant, Liberty Tree Tavern, but you have to walk up the stairs and back, and you actually cross into what is technically, I believe it's actually Adventureland, where that bathroom is officially located. So we actually have two legitimate attractions in Liberty Square that we're going to discuss. And one of them is Courtney's favorite ride in all of Walt Disney World. So I'm going to let her talk about it. And that is Haunted Mansion.
Right. So when I have to pick, when push comes to shove, it's very hard for me to pick a favorite, basically of anything, but Haunted Mansion is quintessential Disney. It is classic. It has all of the magical tricks. It has so many different rooms We have the iconic ballroom scene, things in the attic, the graveyard. I love the staircase scene. Madame Leota is one of the all-time extremely classic scenes. It's just perfect to me all around and something that everybody can enjoy.
Earlier in the episode, Courtney and I mentioned that we are from Pennsylvania originally, and the facade of the Haunted Mansion is based on a building in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. And I've actually had the chance to go up and see that, and it is really cool. It kind of has that, I think they were going more for an upstate New York vibe, but Jim Thorpe is kind of in a similar area to upstate New York. And they definitely really tackled that vibe in a very, very impressive way. The other major attraction that is in Liberty Square would be the Hall of Presidents. And this is something, I was a history major in college. I can definitely nerd out on that stuff a lot. Obviously, you hear me talking about the things I like about Liberty Square. I think they have done a really good job updating the Hall of Presidents. There's a video that runs before you get all the animatronics of the presidents. That video really shows how we look towards presidents in the toughest times. And it's not necessarily talking about presidents and their political opinions or anything like that. It shows that when we're in the Depression, when we're in World War II, when we're dealing with all of the things at the turn of the century, when obviously we're dealing with a civil war, when we're dealing with these really, really tough times, that we look to the president to be sort of that common voice. They do a very, very good job with that. There was a time that was happening very recently where people started to kind of cheer and boo depending on their particular ideological bends. And I thought that was very awkward. Like it just made, no matter if the people agreed with you or not, it just made it uncomfortable to be there because you didn't want a shouting match breaking out in the theater. But I think now people have kind of calmed down doing that. And the last 5 times I've been there, that did not happen. And then to close out the show with 45 animatronics, that is so very impressive. And this was something that Walt originally wanted at Disneyland, but they didn't have the resources to do that many animatronics. So we just ended up getting Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln over there, which is also an amazing show. But just to finally see that come to fruition, I think is really, really cool. Technically, there is another attraction in Liberty Square, and that is the Liberty Bell, which is a ride, I guess. You kind of forget about it because it goes around 2 different lands. It starts in Liberty Square, and then it is a steamboat that goes around through Frontierland, takes you past what was Splash Mountain, is going to be Tiana's Bayou Adventure, takes you past the actual best ride in Walt Disney World, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. You get to see onto Tom Sawyer Island. The steamboat being such an important part of the growth of the United States, of westward expansion, having it start in Liberty Square and then go into Frontierland. That makes a whole lot of sense that they do that. This is a nice way to sort of get off your feet for a little bit, but if it's hot in the middle of the day and you want to get off your feet, do Hall of Presidents because it can get very, very hot on the Liberty Bell as well. But I do think it's worth a ride every once in a while. Sometimes when people are on their vacations, they don't have this kind of time to give up a half hour to just kind of lazily float along the rivers of America. But once you've gone a few years, once you've made a few trips, this is something I do think you'd want to try. Now, the restaurants at Liberty Square. You really like this quick service location. You love to pick up snacks at Sleepy Hollow.
Yes, now I actually haven't had the favorite dish, which is like a spicy chicken and waffles, because that's not really my jam. But people love it, and I know it's good. So chicken and waffles are there. As a breakfast, you can do a Nutella and fruit waffle, which is really great. It will usually have some specialty treats. It might have the Haunted Mansion themed cake pops. Sometimes there's a Haunted Mansion themed drink, which is refreshing. You might be able to pick up some souvenir specialty sippers. It does have a few really good little snacks, and it's a good location right there on the corner where you can see Cinderella Castle.
Then there's also Diamond Horseshoe Review. I have not been there since it has reopened after the pandemic closures. This was not reopening for a long, long time, and it just reopened fairly recently, considering everything. So I haven't been back there. I have been to Liberty Tree Tavern a number of times. That is a really good restaurant as well. They do have a plant-based option, but much like the Plaza, this is your comfort foods. These are those classic Americana meals, like you would be eating a meal at somebody's house in 1776. So while it's a good restaurant and the food is very quality, it's not a place I seek out very much, because if I'm going to eat in Walt Disney World, I'm going to try something that I don't feel like I could get every day. But I know there are a lot of people who don't want to be adventurous, or maybe they're going to be adventurous 4 days out of their vacation, and the fifth day they just want food that they know they're going to like. So Liberty Tree Tavern is a very good restaurant for those people. Unfortunately, there is something that is missing from Liberty Square, because they used to have this Muppet show, and it was phenomenal. Why don't you talk about that, Courtney?
Right. So the Muppets, of course, do their thing. They have, great little comedy, and they would tell the story of Paul Revere and some other classic history type stories, especially from the Revolutionary period. And the Muppets are just great. They're fun. It added a little something that you could do there. And just loving the Muppets personally, I kind of miss it. And maybe we'll see if it comes back.
When I talked about the flag retrieval, and it's something that you just sometimes happen to see when you're walking on Main Street, USA, and maybe you don't plan to be there, but that makes it more special. I think that Muppet show, which would just randomly start, definitely had that vibe. Like, you would be walking through Liberty Square and the Muppets would just start telling this story about US history, and they are just so quintessentially them. Like, the Muppets have this vibe that is so different than anything else. The people are revolting. We are revolting. Like, those things are just so funny. And it was a really good show to just come up upon during your day at Magic Kingdom. Now we are going to leave Magic Kingdom. We're going to hop on the monorail and head over to Epcot, where we have the American Adventure Pavilion. This is right in the dead center of World Showcase. This is a pavilion that when we used to come on vacation, I barely would spend any time at it. But now that we live here and we go to the parks a whole lot more frequently, I find myself spending more time at it. Now, they did make it better as well, so we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the main focus of the American Adventure Pavilion is the American Adventure Show. This show, much like the Hall of Presidents, has a lot of very impressive animatronics, and it tells the story of the United States. I think it tries to tell the story more through the eyes of people who make a difference than the Hall of Presidents is the leaders who make a difference. For the most part, a lot of this is the everyday people, the people who are actually fighting in World War II, or the women who are working the jobs that the men had to abandon to go fight World War II. So you see it through sort of that Rosie the Riveter's point of view. Yes, the song at the end is very cheesy, and there is the song about the two brothers during the Civil War that I really don't like. I think that needs to change very desperately. But the rest of the show is very impressive. There's a point where the Benjamin Franklin animatronic actually walks, and it's like, whoa, did I just see that? Like, it's a very, very cool show. Mark Twain is one of the hosts with Benjamin Franklin, and he's hilarious, of course, because it's Mark Twain. So there's a lot to really like about this show. They have animatronics of Chief Joseph and Frederick Douglass. Like, this isn't just celebrating the presidents like the Hall of Presidents over in Magic Kingdom. This is celebrating the American people who have fought to make changes throughout the course of the country.
Rick, you've really captured it in a nutshell. This is not a show that I necessarily always want to do. I do think it's impressive and you definitely should experience it. It is a bit long. You get yourself off of your feet in air conditioning, but it's not something you need to do all the time. Just experience it at least once. But one thing I do think you should try to catch is the Voices of Liberty performing inside the pavilion. They perform a cappella, and they are just absolutely fantastic. They're so talented. You will absolutely love them.
The building itself was created to have the proper acoustics for an a cappella group to sing exactly where they stand to do these performances. So it is definitely worth it. Like, you are seeing the best possible incarnation of these songs being performed by fantastic singers. There's also usually one or sometimes two exhibits, museum-style exhibits, in the American Adventure. They will rotate. There's been one for a while on Native American culture, which Courtney and I, we've talked about being from Pennsylvania originally. We did move here from Arizona, where a lot of that Arizona culture is wrapped up in its Native American heritage. And you can see a lot of that in the exhibit that is at the American Adventure. And I do think that we need to acknowledge the indigenous people more when telling the story of the United States. So whenever there's a cool exhibit in there, take the time to check it out. When the movie Soul was in its original run, they had a tribute to jazz in there. And jazz music, obviously, like a creation of the United States. Americans created jazz. So it was so appropriate to have a tribute to jazz in the American Adventure Pavilion. And then we have to go to the restaurant here. And this is one of the best changes Walt Disney World has made in the last 15 years. They took a horrible quick service location and turned it into what might be the best quick service location in Epcot, and that's Regal Eagle Smokehouse. It is themed towards the Muppets. We talked about how much we loved the Muppets just a few minutes ago, but also it's focused on barbecue, a type of food, much like jazz music, that you associate so much with the United States. So you have this very Americana food. You have the Muppets, which are an Americana brand. And I love this place. I think it's phenomenal.
I love it as well. So again, the Muppets theming, and you have a bit of a revolutionary type theming. The food is really great, especially being a quick service. Good value, good overall. Definitely check it out.
So we went back and forth on whether we should include Frontierland as part of this conversation, and I think we voted against it just because with Tiana's Bayou Adventure replacing Splash Mountain, we're not exactly sure what Frontierland is going to look like in the future, whether maybe we end up getting our own New Orleans Square on the East Coast. So we're just going to kind of skip over Frontierland. That's where we're going to leave things off today with our look at the three most American-based lands in Walt Disney World. And yes, I know you could also say that Hollywood is an American vibe, but it's a completely different American vibe, and we will talk about all of the Hollywood Studios stuff again sometime in the near future. But we thought in honor of the 4th of July, this would be a fun conversation to have on the show. Thank you so much for being here, Courtney.
Thank you, and glad to be here.
This has been episode 127 of Tall Guy Talks Travel with Rick Doherty. We will be back next Thursday when the Sarah Enigma will wrap up her 3-episode stretch of asking questions about planning a Walt Disney World trip for somebody who hasn't been since before the pandemic. An awful lot has changed at Walt Disney World, and the first 2 installments have really helped people plan their vacations. Until then, have a great week.